under part 2 of chapter 5, we have section E, which generally talks about powers and control over public funds. Under section E, we have subsection 120, which talks about establishment of Consolidated Revenue funds. Subsection 121, which talks about authorization of expenditure from Consolidated Revenue Fund. Subsection 122, which talks about authorization of expenditure in default of appropriations. Subsection 123, which talks about Contingencies Fund. Subsection 124, which talks about remuneration, etc. of the government and certain other officers. Subsection 125, which talks about Audit of Public accounts. Subsection 126, which talks about appointments of Auditor-General. Subsection 127, which talks about tenure of office of Auditor-General. Subsection 128, which talks about power to conduct investigations. Subsection 129, which talks about power as to matters of evidence. Let's go to chapter 6, which generally talks about the executive. Under chapter 6, we have part 1, and part 1 generally talks about federal executive. And under part 1, we have section A, which talks about the president of the federation. And under section A, we have subsection 130, which talks about establishment of the office of president. Subsection 31, which talks about qualification for election as president. Subsection 32, which talks about election of the president general. Subsection 133, which talks about election single presidential candidate. Subsection 134, which talks about election 2 or more presidential candidates. Subsection 135, which talks about tenure of office of president. Subsection 136, which talks about deaths, etc. of presidents elect before oath of office. Subsection 137, which talks about disqualification. Subsection 138, which talks about president's disqualification from other jobs. Subsection 139, which talks about determination of certain questions relating to election. Subsection 140, which talks about declaration of assets and liabilities, oaths of president. Subsection 144, which talks about establishment of office of vice president. Subsection 142, which talks about nomination and election of vice president. Subsection 143, which talks about removal of president from office. Subsection 144, which talks about permanent incapacity of president or vice president. Subsection 145, talking about acting president during temporary absence of president. Subsection 146, talking about discharge of functions of president. Subsection 147, talking about ministers of federal government. Subsection 148, talking about executive responsibilities of ministers. Subsection 149, talking about declaration of assets and liabilities, oaths of ministers. Subsection 150, talking about Attorney General of the Federation. Subsection 151, talking about special advisors. Subsection 152, talking about declaration of assets and liabilities, oaths of special advisors. Still in chapter 1, we have section B, which generally talks about the establishment of certain federal executive bodies. Under section B, we have subsection 153, which talks about federal commissions and councils, etc. Subsection 154, which talks about appointment of chairman and members. Subsection 155, which talks about tenure of office of members. Subsection 156, which talks about qualification for membership. Subsection 157, which talks about removal of members. Subsection 158, which talks about independence of certain bodies. Subsection 159, which talks about quorum and decisions. Subsection 160, which talks about powers and procedures. Subsection 161, which talks about interpretation. Going to section C, which generally talks about public revenue. Under section C, we have subsection 162, which talks about distributable pool account. Subsection 163, which talks about allocations of other revenue. Subsection 164, which talks about federal grants in aid of state revenue. Subsection 165, which talks about costs of collection of certain duties. Subsection 66, which talks about the set-off. Subsection 167, which talks about sums charged on Consolidated Revenue Fund. Subsection 168, which talks about provisions with regard to payments. Going to section D, it generally talks about the public service of the Federation. And under section D, we have subsection 169, which talks about establishments of civil service of the Federation. Subsection 170, which talks about Federal Civil Service Commission, power to delegate functions. Subsection 171, which talks about presidential appointments. Subsection 172, which talks about code of conduct. Subsection 173, which talks about protection of pension rights. Subsection 174, which talks about public persecutions. Subsection 175, which talks about prerogative of mercy. Going to part 2, it generally talks about the state executive. And under part 2, we have section 8, which talks about the governor of a state. Under section A, we have subsection 176, which talks about establishment of office of governor. Subsection 177, which talks about qualification for election as governor. Subsection 78, which talks about election of governor general. Subsection 179, which talks about election, single candidates and two or more candidates. Subsection 180, which talks about tenure of office of governor. Subsection 181, which talks about death, etc. of governor before oath of office. Subsection 182, which talks about disqualifications. Subsection 183, which talks about governor disqualification from other jobs. Subsection 184, which talks about determination of certain question relating to election. Subsection 185, which talks about declaration of assets and liabilities, oaths of office of governor. Subsection 186, which talks about establishment of the office of the deputy governor. Subsection 187, which talks about nomination and election of the deputy governor. Subsection 188, which talks about removal of governor or deputy governor from office. Subsection 189, which talks about permanent incapacity of governor or deputy governor. Subsection 190, which talks about acting governor during temporary absence of governor. Subsection 191, which talks about discharge of functions of governor. Subsection 192, which talks about commissioners of state governments. Subsection 193 talks about executive responsibilities of deputy governor and commissioners. Subsection 194 which talks about declaration of assets and liabilities, oaths of commissioners. Subsection 195 which talks about attorney general of the state. Subsection 196 which talks about special advisors. Let's go to section B, which generally talks about establishments of certain states executive bodies. Under section B, we have subsection 197 talking about the state commissioners, subsection 198 talking about appointments of chairman and members, subsection 199 talking about tenure of office of the members, subsection 200 talking about qualification of membership, subsection 201 talking about removal of members, subsection 202 talking about independence of certain bodies, subsection 203 talking about quorum and decisions, subsection 204 talking about powers and procedure, subsection 205 talking about interpretation. We have section C, which generally talks about the public service of states. And under section C, we have subsection 206, which talks about establishment of state civil service. Subsection 207, which talks about state civil service commission, power of delegation. Subsection 208, which talks about appointments by governors. Subsection 209 which talks about code of conduct, subsection 210 which talks about protection of pension rights, subsection 211 which talks about public prosecutions. Still under chapter 6, we have part 3 which generally talks about supplemental, and under part 3 we have section A which generally talks about national population census, and under section A we have subsection 213 which talks about national population census. Under part 3 we have section B which generally talks about Nigerian police force, and under section B we have subsection 214 which talks about establishment of police force, subsection 215 which talks about appointment of inspector general and control of Nigeria police force, subsection 216 which talks about delegation of powers to the inspector general of police. Still under chapter 6 of part 3 we have subsection C which talks about armed forces of the federation, and under section C we have subsection 217 which talks about establishment and composition of the armed force of the federation, subsection 218 which talks about command and operational use, subsection 219 which talks about establishment of body to ensure federal character of armed forces, subsection 220 which talks about compulsory military services. Under part 3 we still have section D which talks about political parties, and under section D we have subsection 221 which talks about prohibition of political activities by certain association, subsection 222 which talks about restrictions on formation of political parties, subsection 223 which talks about constitution and rules of political parties, subsection 224 which talks about aims and objectives, subsection 225 which talks about finances of political parties, subsection 226 which talks about annual reports on finances, subsection 227 which talks about prohibition of quasi-military organizations, subsection 228 which talks about powers of the National Assembly with respect to political parties, subsection 229 which talks about interpretation. Let's go to chapter 7 which generally talks about judicator, and under chapter 7 we have part 1. Part 1 talks about federal courts. And under Part 1 we have Section A, which generally talks about the Supreme Court of Nigeria. Under Section A we have subsection 230, which talks about establishment of the Supreme Court of Nigeria.
Hear me now. This is a soul fire production. Soul fire production. Soul fire production.
Black in the skin, white at heart as God. Black boys and girls standing strong and proud. Wise is your might, champions of the night. Light is their plight.